Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, freedom finders. Welcome back to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith, and we are here again at Float Fest for a special impromptu interview. That bug just tried to hit me in the face. It was hilarious. Jim Davidson is our special guest, not the bugs, hopefully. Welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
It's good to be here, and obviously it must know that you're into software development because it's a bug.
Yeah, these bugs are coming at me from all sides right now, that's for sure. Okay, so I was talking with some friends at the event, and they mentioned that you had a fascinating story involving living under a waterfall. Am I getting that right? For almost a year?
I did. I lived under a waterfall south of Eureka Springs on a property, 114 acres, that we had under contract for deed, and we were working on putting together a freedom community there.
Okay.
The plan was to have about 70 of those acres become 1 acre home sites for different people.
Okay.
And we had a number of people work with us on lot reservations. And we also had one guy came forth with a lot deposit, and we worked on that project, and I lived under a waterfall that I learned in late August was a seasonal waterfall.
Oh, okay.
And it was drainage fed from about, I think, 120 acres. And I was getting tired of going to town for water. And I was led spiritually to go in a direction I had not previously gone on the property. And behold, there was another waterfall that is spring-fed. And it was permanent. It was a wonderful waterfall with delicious water, about 4,000 gallons a minute, if you can visualize that much water coming over the edge of a cliff between a cedar tree and an oak tree. It was delightful.
Let's back up. I definitely want to get to that, but I have to ask you. I already broke my rule, but the first question I ask you is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, hi. My name is Jim Davidson, and I'm addicted to freedom. Hi, Jim. And, it's one of those one day at a time things, Well, did you have any freedom today? No. Are you going to have freedom tomorrow? I don't know. So, I was working within the system. I was a voter. I voted. I forgot about that now. But I voted then. In 1988, there was a fellow running for president named Ron Paul. I voted for him. He was a Libertarian Party candidate. I thought this was better than the other choices available to me.
How old were you in 88?
Well, you know this guy, John F. Kennedy?
Yes.
Okay. I was born the same year he was shot. And I was born before he was shot. So I could be a suspect.
Okay.
But I was only 8 months old. A few days short of my 8-month, day. And so I was too weak to hold up any of the rifles in the 4-shooter positions that we know of now.
Have you been to the square in Dallas?
I have not been to Dealey Plaza now.
Yeah.
I have not. But so my first presidential campaign was 1980. I was too young to vote, but I was old enough to be stupid enough to campaign for John Anderson. I thought he was the right candidate for the Republicans. And then when he ran as an independent, I thought that was great. I was very impressed that the League of Women Voters let him be a debate participant with Carter and Reagan for some of the debates. But then I voted in 84, and I must have been insane because I thought the space astronaut guy, John Glenn, would be pro-space, and I would like that. So I worked for him in New Hampshire in 84. I was a college student, so I took a train to New Hampshire. And then I slept in a dorm room, and I worked for his primary. And that was very foolish. I did not know about the Keating 5 scandal. I didn't know about Lincoln Savings and Loan. So, And I in 1988, the second time I had the opportunity to vote for a presidential candidate, I voted for this Ron Paul fellow because George Herbert Walker Bush, well, he was there in Dallas the day that Kennedy was shot, and he just seemed like a scumbag to me. Still does. He's dead. I'm sorry. What can you say? Don't speak ill of the dead. Fine, don't be ill. If you are dead, don't be an ill mother. So then there was going to be an election in 1992, but that was a long way off, and I had a friend of mine asked me a question in 1990, and I assure you, this leads to me becoming an anarchist.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going through where I was in my life in 90.
In 1988, I was the author of what they called the Davidson Act in the space community, and I insisted they use the title Launch Service Purchases Act, and it was rewritten by Dana Rohrabacher's office, but it was actually passed, and it committed NASA to buying commercial launches, and they didn't. They lied. They broke the law.
Well, they didn't have Elon yet.
Right. So anyway, I was working in the space industry at the time. 1986, I became the summer intern for Deke Slayton and David Hanna Jr.'s Space Services. And that meant that I wrote a lot of software. And if you feel bad about the work you do, try writing an entire real estate sales program in Lotus 123 macros. I myself did not do this. I inherited this from Alex, the guy before me, and he had done a good job, so I maintained the code. It's like, I want to say it was like 800 lines of macro code. No, it would have been 8,000 lines of macro code, yes. And then in addition to the macro code, there were the floor plans, and they threw a new floor plan at me, and I had to work out how to put that floor plan in the cells of a Lotus spreadsheet and adjust cell height and cell column width.
To draw the floor plan?
To draw the floor plan so it could be shown on
in a
spreadsheet. Compact computer.
Okay.
A 1984 compact computer with the green monochrome screen. And we were able to ask the customer questions about their income and expenses, qualify them for a house, and show them the floor plans of the houses they qualified for. And that was the most retarded way to write that software. But it worked!
Yeah.
And I kept that code going. And I also wrote the business plan for Space Services, and I also kept their financial model. I was going to Rice University at the time, so it made sense to hire me. And I knew the guy who was the intern before me because he also was a Rice business school student. So anyway, so moving on, I got involved in the space industry in 1968. I was 5, and my dad had bought a black and white television and put it in the living room. And my brothers were stunned. They had never been allowed to watch television. If there was a show, they had to go see a friend in the evening to watch a good show. Now, no television. But then suddenly there were going to be political events, the Chicago convention and the San Francisco convention. So suddenly there was a reason to have a television. We had a television. And it stayed in the living room after the election until Christmas. And a guy named Frank Borman was orbiting the moon on Apollo 8, and he spoke. He read the Bible from the moon. He read the book of Genesis. And it was cool. And my mom and dad took me to a film called 2001: A Space Odyssey.
A bug is hitching a ride.
Oh, nice.
You got it. A little extra protein,
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, their Beatles aren't much.
Sorry.
Unless they play the guitar, then the Beatles are cool. And so I was convinced as a 5-year-old that well, I know that's a movie. I know that was fiction. But at the same time, here's a guy in a hotel in orbit, and here's a group of people walking around on the surface of the moon. It seemed like that would be happening. By the time I grew up, we would be doing this. So I got excited about this. And later, when there was a thing called the L5 Society, I got involved in what we called space activism, which is the idea that rather than building missiles to kill one another, we could use the same missile technology to settle the space frontier. We would have more freedom out there. A guy named Freeman Dyson once said, once we get to the asteroid belt, the IRS will never find us.
Little did he know.
But there is literally, soup raining out there. If you look at just one of the asteroids in the main belt, there's more platinum group metals in that one asteroid that we know of than have been mined on the surface of the Earth since the beginning of time. And you could go and make the extraction industries happen out there instead of down here. They're very polluting. And you could refine the metals in space, and you could do interesting things. You can do things like, in microgravity, you can foam metal. So you have a material that's like steel. It has a lot of the properties of steel, but it has much less weight.
Interesting.
And it's a fascinating topic. Materials development proved to be one of the things that caused that company I was working for to get a launch contract. I knew about these universities that wanted to do experiments because my dad worked at a university. So when I was growing up, he was the chairman of the physics department of a physics and astronomy department at the University of Kansas. So I told my boss in May of 1986 that there were all these payloads and we could go get them. And they were like, how would you do that? And I said, well, we need to send them a survey. Do you have a payload that needs a launch? Here are some launch capabilities that we have, and ask them if they want help getting funding for their payload to get launched. Turned out there were like 44 different payloads that wanted from different universities. I got a list from the atmospheric science group at the University of Colorado, and they had a list of all of these groups that did atmospheric
They all
research.
come with their own attached budgets that you could kind of pool together,
They
maybe?
did not, but
No.
we had a guy in Washington, Charlie Chafer, organized a Centers for Commercial Development of Space project, and NASA was forced to fund millions of dollars for these universities to do launch purchases for their payloads, and that worked. And we got contracts. We got a series of 7 launches, and I got to be involved in the first 3 of those. So that's what I was doing in 1987 and 88 and 89. And on my birthday in 1989, we launched the first Starfire rocket from White Sands Missile Range and put the first consort payload 200 miles up and 200 miles downrange. It had 7.5 minutes of microgravity. We provided them with 20% more microgravity time for their material science experiments at half the budget and in 1/3 of the time. We were 3 times faster than NASA at doing the same launch that they would have done with a Black Brant 9.
I would have never guessed.
It was awesome. So in 1990, I had switched companies because Space Services had never figured out how to give me a single share of stock. That's all I wanted. I didn't mind making, at that time, 1990, $35,000 a year. But I wanted a share of stock. And they wouldn't give me one. They had it all figured out for different things, like, getting investor capital. So
You literally just asked for one?
Yeah.
And they said no?
They never made it happen. So I left in November of 89, and I went to work for Walt Anderson at Microsatellite Launch Systems. And so in May of 1990, I was working for him, and we were going to Washington the month before to do marketing to different agencies and Walt insisted that these be not Pentagon agencies, non-military payloads to go into orbit. And a friend of mine asked me a question, and he was put up to it. By then, the L5 Society had been mostly taken over by a group called the National Space Institute that had been founded by Wernher von Braun in 1976. And if you can imagine Wernher von Braun, I don't know if you know this, but he was a Nazi.
Okay.
Now, there was another guy, Dornberger, who was also a Nazi.
Okay.
But he was only a Nazi because they basically wouldn't let him be promoted unless he was. So he joined the one thing, the Nazi Deer Club.
I see. Yeah.
He once said that he liked venison more than politics.
You had to be a party member to get.
And you had to be a party member to get anywhere, and so he did that thing. And then, but von Braun joined everything: the Pilots Club, the Deer Hunting Club, this club, that club. He loved the Nazis because they were funding his experiments. And I don't know if you've ever heard the Tom Lehrer song, but.
No.
I send up the rockets. Who cares where they come down? That's not my department, says Werner von Braun. The widows and orphans in old London town owe their large pensions to Werner von Braun.
Wow.
And stuff like that. It's a good song. It's but anyway, so I was told later that Gary Olson, a member of the board of directors of the National Space Society, which was the merger of the L5 Society and the National Space Institute. We only got one word out of it, but fine. And he told Howard Stringer, the president of the Houston Space Society, to ask this question at the next mailing party, where we put together 1,100 copies of our newsletter, the Journal for Space Development, to go out to our subscribers and the local media, keeping them up to date on the space movement once a month. And I was having it. The mailing party was at my house. And this was back in the day when we didn't have, the internet. You couldn't just spam people with emails. You had to actually assemble a newsletter and photocopy it. There were very unfortunate aerospace corporations in the Clear Lake area of Houston that had foolishly agreed to let us use their photocopiers. And we did this. We made lots of copies, and we were folding and putting on the labels and doing the sorting the way that the bulk mail acceptance would do. And we are still a nonprofit, the Houston Space Society, 501c3. If people want to throw money at us, any day, we're happy. We'll give you a tax write-off if you are silly enough that you still pay taxes. Or if you know someone who does. So, for all your friends who are, still stuck in the system. And the question was this: what is the one thing the Houston Space Society could do in the next 10 years that would, more than anything else, change the way people think about space? And I knew the answer. I said, Howard, we could put a member of the Houston Space Society in orbit. And he said, Jim, how would you do that? And I said, Howard.
With a rocket?
John Denver wants to pay $10 million to the Soviets to put him on the Mir space station for a week. That's how we do it. There's a Bloom County. I don't know if you remember Bloom County, the comic strip.
No.
There was a very nice penguin that was popularized by this. But there was a comic strip. One of the characters is like a beaver, and another one's a rabbit. And the rabbit's reading the newspaper, and it says, "Oh, I see here that the Soviets are going to take John Denver into orbit." And the weasel, or whatever it is, the groundhog says, "Oh, that's good news. That's good news indeed." And then there's this panel where they're both looking at each other, and the rabbit says, "And bring him back." Oh, why would they do that? But anyway, we all knew that this was a thing, and that you could ask the Soviets for a ride, and they would train you at the Star City in Kazakhstan, and they would teach you how to become a cosmonaut. And they would take you up there. They would launch you on a Soyuz rocket, and you could float around in space. And this was a thing people were doing. Helen Sharman did this for Saatchi & Saatchi, which is a British advertising company. And Toyohiro Akiyama was doing this for Tokyo Broadcasting Service, Japanese kind of captured news media at that time. And so my friend Alvin Carley said, we should give it away as a raffle. Because we're a charity, we can run a raffle and sell raffle tickets and give tickets, sell tickets, and then we'll give the trip away. And it's not just our member, but anybody in Houston. And I said, why not anybody in the world? And David Meyer was standing there, and he said, no. Bon Jovi's house was just given away by MTV, and you dialed a 900 number or you sent a letter, if you could get the VCR and freeze frame the rules as they scrolled by, you could find the free alternative entry. But everyone just called the 900 number for 99 cents. They got 1 million calls. The house in New Jersey, where Bon Jovi grew up, was like a $250,000 house. They made bank on this. And David said, if people will pay 99 cents for a call to get a house, what will they pay to fly in space? And I said, we've got a business. This is going to work. So we started Space Travel Services. Howard, David, and I formed a corporation, and we organized a sweepstakes, and we had an in. We had a friend. Art Dula was a patent attorney in Houston, and when the Challenger blew up, he knew guys at Hughes Aerospace who wanted to fly their satellites to geosynchronous orbit and could not because NASA had rather cleverly worked with the Air Force to conspire to get rid of all of the expendable launch vehicles in the United States. Smart. Put all your eggs in one basket. Here's that basket. And then... and you know all of the jokes, right? What does NASA stand for? Need another 7 astronauts.
Oh.
What did the co-pilot say to the pilot? No, I'm in a Bud Light.
Oh.
What did Krista McAuliffe say to her husband just before launch? You go home and feed the dog, I'll feed the fish. It's bad. It's terrible, terrible stuff. I'm sorry. I know all of these horrifying jokes from the time.
Pain. Yeah.
But he actually went over to the Soviet Union and asked on bended knee if the Soviets would launch Hughes aircraft satellites. And they worked out an export control regime. It took them months to get the paperwork right with the government. But eventually, Hughes aircraft was allowed to use Proton rockets to put geosynchronous satellites in geosynchronous orbits, and they didn't lose their shirts. They only had to pay delay fees, not cancellation fees. So life was good. And so we met in his home. He was a member of the Houston Space Society. We met in his home, and we brought him croissant and chocolates, and he was very happy. He said a gift of food is always appropriate. I will never forget that. And he went to the Soviet Union, and in October of 1990, he came back with our contract.
Wow.
Meanwhile, we had written a business plan. We had talked to all of our friends. We had gotten all the money we needed. We hired a public relations firm, Brown Nelson, and we had an agreement with KPMG Pete Marwick to do the accounting part, which meant picking out which one of these people would win. And we knew about free alternative entry through the mail, so we had it set up. We read it. We went to the library and read books all about sweepstakes, and we made a lawful sweepstakes. And then we hired, before October had happened, before our guy came back with a contract, we hired Haley, Bader & Potts, a Washington, D.C. based law firm. They had done the MCI suit in 1984 that broke up AT&T. And they knew everything about communications law, including sweepstakes law. And they wrote us a 14-page legal opinion letter showing how it was completely lawful. And we avoided states like New York that required us to put up a bond equal to the value of the launch.
Yep.
So we didn't want to tell people how much it cost, and we also didn't want to... We said it was worth at least $1 million to the person taking the trip, and we didn't want to put $1 million in the hands of the state of New York because, screw those people.
Right.
So we were ready to make our announcement, and on the 10th of December, I called my friend Courtney Stadt. He worked for the National Space Council as their executive director. And I had been in the space industry, and I had been very active in the industry. Everybody knew me and him. And so I said, Courtney, you need to tell the National Space Council we're doing this. And I explained what we were doing. And he said, okay, what if they don't want you to do it? I said, it's easy. Call me. We're not making our announcement until a week from today. Call me on the phone. Send me a fax. Just tell me don't do it. And we will not do it. And then we will figure something else out. And he said, okay, that's very fair. I like that. I'm glad you're, happy to work with us on this basis. I wasn't happy. But I knew that, the opportunity to get screwed to the wall with a molly bolt was there, and I didn't want that. So they had a meeting. They had an emergency meeting of the National Space Council. Dan Quayle and everybody. George Abbey from the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, said, this will destroy the space station program politically. We have to prevent this from happening.
Why?
Because the space station program was not yet fully funded, and they believed that if Americans saw an American flying on the Soviet space station, there would be no political support for an American space station, which I think is actually horse. But I don't know if I'm allowed to use.
Say whatever you want.
Horseshit. But that's what they thought, or said they thought. Anyway, so they ordered Courtney to have no further contact. Courtney's dad would have been happy to tell me to stop, but they wouldn't let him. They wanted to destroy us, and so they did.
So they told him to not tell you couldn't do it, so that you would start doing it, so they could tell you, so they could stop you after you had already made the commitments and destroy you.
Yes, it was that way, and we know this because they didn't give him a gag order on this. They told him not to talk to us, but he talked to Scott Satterwhite, one of our investors, at an event called the International Space University Founding Conference, and told him all about what had been done to us and how sorry he was and how he didn't want it that way, but he was following orders.
Mm-hmm.
So they called us downtown and they told the media that the Harris County District Attorney was looking into this. They thought it was a sweepstakes, but they weren't sure, and they wanted us to, talk to them. So we went and talked to them, and we told them what we were doing. We showed them our contract, and we showed them our 14-page legal opinion letter. And they also said to the media after our meeting, we are not telling them to stop.
Mm.
So we were like, okay, we're not going to stop. We hired more lawyers, hired local lawyers to help us with this process. A guy from Fulbright Jaworski basically volunteered to be hired at a very high rate of pay, but we did that. And we also worked out that we could sell a lot of advertising now that we were widely known. I was above the fold, my name above the fold with Space Travel Services 4 times, New York Times that week.
Oh.
4 out of the 5 issues from Tuesday through Saturday.
Okay.
I was on the front cover of the Houston Post every day that week. And on the Sunday special, they had me, Howard, and David full-size portrait on a special insert because Dick Singleton, who ran the Houston Post, wanted us to do this. Wanted us to be. He had no idea we were doing it until we announced, but then he wanted it to be successful because he was doing sweepstakes giveaways for one of his Dallas papers. So we went to my Uncle John and we said, "Hey, I need a contact at Ralston Purina. You used to work there." John had been a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, in the U.S. Army, and had retired, and so he found me a contact at Ralston Purina, and they were very excited. They wanted to put rice checks and wheat checks in orbit, and we wanted $2.5 million.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Yeah, okay, wow. 7 days. How many commercials can we shoot with your person?" We were like, "Well, half an hour every day." And we're like, and they, yes, okay. So we were ready to ink a deal. We had a memorandum of understanding with them.
Yep.
We were talking to Boeing because Boeing was interested in this project, and they thought that they would have some product that we could put up in space. That it would be the first time ever for thus and such gizmo. And we never inked a deal with them, but I actually went to St. Louis and came back with a letter of understanding about the rice checks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started advertising on the 4th of February, 1991. We let our first ads go out. And they came to our offices the next day and arrested us. They charged me with felony gambling promotion of lottery. They also charged David Meyer, the president of the company. And what they wanted from us in our offices, they spent hours in our offices, like, I don't know, at least 2 hours that morning, looking at everything. They handcuffed us and they sat us on the couch in David's office, and they looked for the list of people who had called the 900 number, because they wanted to make it one charge, one count of felony gambling promotion for every single individual who had called this number. For $2.99, the Ultimate Adventure Sweepstakes will let you fly in space.
Wow.
Meanwhile, you can get a newsletter if you just answer a few questions after the beep. And then we would tell them what to say. And we needed a name and address, and we would send them the Houston Space Society newsletter. And we were all very excited about this. And the printout of all of those people was on the bookshelf. Not once in our entire time in David's office did they look at his bookshelf. They didn't look at the books. I guess, assistant district attorneys don't read or something.
So they arrested you for felony what?
Gambling promotion of a lottery, which is a crime in Texas in 1991.
But you had a legal opinion saying
that it was a sweepstakes and not a lottery. Yes,
okay.
yes. And it went through all of the relevant precedents. And and in May of 1991, they did agree to an injunction where they enjoined us from ever doing another sweepstakes in Texas. And we, agreeing to that, got them to admit that it had been a sweepstakes all along and they were dropping the charges. But our business was destroyed by May, so we had there was no way to continue. But yeah, they admitted that they had lied.
So the magic spell system turned out to not be objective law that protects people.
I know. What a rip!
Yeah, I know.
I thought
I want my money back.
Listen. The innocent until proven guilty thing were words that came out of my mouth that morning when we got to the hallway where the cameras were on the 6th floor of our building in the Clear Lake area, and then they hauled us downtown and made us wait down the street from the jail. Now, the jail has a drive-through entrance, so they can bring perpetrators in without having to...
No publicity.
Yeah. They perp walked us. And that was actually kind of interesting because, 2 or 3 blocks, however far it was, these guys were walking backwards with television cameras, which were pretty big back in 91.
Yep.
And they were... And I think David actually was the one who... I was furious at this point because I knew that I was no longer innocent until proven guilty. I was being proven guilty on the television.
Being run through the system is often enough punishment to get the effect that they need.
Well, let me say that, there is the system and then there is the system. Houston has a jail called Old Harris County, and that's where we went in 1991. And Old Harris County had an inch of sewage on the floor of the main holding cell because the toilets didn't work, the plumbing didn't work. All the other cells they put us in were small and they were overcrowded and they all smelled of the same shit. But one of them, the one we were in for evening meal, whatever you want to call that, supper, I guess. They had bologna sandwiches, piece of bread, piece of bologna, piece of cheese, piece of bread. Brown paper sack. 2-inch gap under the door. The guy comes along and flips in however many people are in that holding cell. He flips in and they all went straight into the sewage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Nobody ate any of those sandwiches. Everyone's like,
why though? You guys were just trying to get somebody in space. Why all
because they wanted to destroy our reputations and arresting us on television, perp walking us. making me sit in the back of their cruiser for at least 45 minutes with my hands cuffed behind my back until the cuffs weren't double locked, so they tightened up on me, and the circulation was cut off that whole time, and it was terribly painful. And they did the perp walking so that we would be on the media as notorious criminals who had done something wrong, and therefore, because you don't get arrested unless you've done something wrong, right? That's the media's position on it.
You're the bad guys, evil, tricky men.
So, that's when my illusions about...
You looked to the sky and screamed anarchy.
Well, not quite. I mean, I had gone to high school in Lawrence, Kansas, and graduated in 1981. So a decade earlier, I had taken 2 courses called Constitution. They didn't have social studies at my high school. They had Constitution. And we learned all about the body of the Constitution, and then we learned all about the amendments. And it was required for graduation. And they told us all about federalism and the states and the federal government. They told us about the checks and balances and the 3 branches of government and the amendments and the Bill of Rights and the yada, yada, yada. They lied to me. And I didn't really... I knew that there was a lot of corruption. I knew there were a lot of problems. I knew that there... I mean, in the 70s, we all knew that JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King were murdered by people in the government. We didn't know exactly who, but we knew because there were hearings in Congress. And we also knew that Frank Church had hearings about the CIA assassinating people all over the world. And the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was actually passed in 1978 and signed into law by Jimmy Carter because something needed to be done. And then they elected Reagan and got rid of Carter, and all of the chance of reform went away. Whatever. As if you could reform the system.
You're summoning a windstorm with this story. It's like we're about to...
Well, I think God probably wants me to move on. So anyway, the short of it is that there were 2 legal things that happened to me in May of 1991. One was I filed bankruptcy because I put everything into this deal. And the other thing was that the agreed injunction prevented me from ever running a sweepstakes in Texas. And they dropped the charges, admitting that it had been a sweepstakes. And I asked around for a job in the aerospace industry in Houston. And you can imagine how very few offers I got.
Yeah.
0! But I did have a friend who had a real estate company, so I went to work for him, and I learned all about real estate development, which proved to be useful because I needed to find a place. I didn't know what to make of this, and I was really shocked, and I was very disillusioned at first. But over that summer, I realized that what I really needed to do was...
Thank you.
What I really needed to do was find a free country. And a couple of years later, a friend of mine invited me from the internet. People don't believe there's an internet in 1991, but there was. The Usenet news groups was the big part. And so I went to Las Vegas to work on the Atlantis project, promoting a new country project in December of 93, and I did a bunch of other things. I wrote a book called The Atlantis Papers. That was my first book, 1994. And as a result of that book being distributed, Courtney Smith, who had put $50,000 into the Atlantis project, called me up one day, and I said, "Hey, you're Courtney Smith. You wrote the book on options trading." And he said, "Yeah, you're Jim Davidson. You wrote the book on the Atlantis project." I said, "Cool." And he said, "Yeah, Eric Klein took the money and covered his short positions on his brokerage account. He was margined to the hilt. We lost it all." I was like, oh. So, that one didn't work. I spent a lot of time with Courtney working on the New Country Foundation. We had a founding conference in November of 95. We did a lot of work with Michael Van Natten. I went to Somalia. If you don't like it here, why don't you move to Somalia? They don't have a government. They have a lot of government. They have far too many governments. That is my direct personal experience, having lived in Somalia.
Far too many governments.
They have way more government than you would ever want.
Yeah.
And some of it is Sharia. Some of it is ancient Somali tradition. Some of it is the Republic of Somaliland, and some of it is the United Nations-backed government of Somalia. And it's all a mess. And we couldn't make it work. We worked there 1995 to 2002, and Michael Van Natten had been working there since about 1990. And when he passed away in 2002, we lost all of our family connections because he married a Somali woman. And so he was connected to the clan, and therefore everyone called him brother-in-law. And cheating a member of your clan is regarded as something you never do. So we weren't... Well, anyway, the short of it is that I was already an anarchist by then. Right?
Okay.
I became an anarchist, and I stopped voting because the system screwed me to the wall with a molly bolt.
Was there a moment where you said, okay, well, that's me now? Or was it just something that happened and one day you realized?
I think what happened is that I was completely shocked and disillusioned and spiritually broken in February of 1991, and I recovered somewhat in Las Vegas in March of 1991 when we tried to run ads to promote the project again, and we realized how completely screwed we were. And then, you know the Kubler-Ross thing. So I was, at first, I denied that I could, comprehend this hasn't happened. This didn't happen to me. And then
Denial.
I accepted that it happened, and
Yeah.
I became angry.
Yeah.
March, I was angry Jim. And then bargaining, blah, blah, blah. We couldn't figure it out. We gave up. We got our lawyers to get the agreed injunctions to work, and we accepted that this was gone, along with a lot of money. And that is when I realized that I should never file another income tax paper. I had filed for 1990 because they had withheld money from my microsatellite launch systems paychecks. So I got that money back. I never filed again. I never had income again, so there's no need to file because none of the things I did constituted income per se. It's defined in the legislature, in the law, so you can read about it. What is income according to the IRS? Nothing that you have ever earned is income, unless you were working for a military contractor or another federal agency. So my conclusion was that I shouldn't vote because it was only encouraging them.
Yeah. And
I shouldn't participate in the system on any level. I have strenuously avoided the 2000, 2010, and 2020 censuses. As far as I know, they don't know where I am.
Yep.
And so that was my journey towards anarchism.
Okay.
But, later I had a breakthrough in my spiritual journey. I invited Jesus into my heart in 1997, and I became a Christian. And I did not have a spiritual home for 20 years. I went to churches looking for a place where I felt the presence of God. And in October of 2017, I found a place like that in Dayton, Ohio, at the Quaker meeting.
Okay.
And so I became a Quaker.
A Quaker?
I'm a Quaker, yes.
Okay, what does that mean for people that don't know what a Quaker is?
The Quakers are called the Religious Society of Friends by the guy who founded them, George Fox. And they were called the Quakers by Bennett Gervais, who was torturing George Fox for blasphemy at the time in 1661 at the Tower of London. And said something about the Bible, just dismissive. And George Fox picked up the Bible that was on the table and said, "You should tremble at the word of God." And Gervais Bennett said something like, "Oh, I should tremble. Yeah, I suppose you tremble. You quake, do you? You're a Quaker." And that's where it comes from.
All right.
And Quakers believe that we are all children of God, that we are all connected to God, that we as souls don't come from here. We come from a beautiful place, heaven, the spiritual realm, whatever you want to call it, and that we occupy bodies in this realm for a time. And if we do things the way God has asked us to do, we inherit eternal life because we partake in the resurrection. And we believe all of this because we read the Bible. And it's all pretty much in there.
Were you a believer to any degree before this Quaker transition?
Well, like I said, in 1997, I had read the Bible again, and I felt that I should invite Jesus into my heart, and I did, and I felt a change within me.
Can you describe that?
I felt a kind of pressure in my heart, and I felt a presence that I had never experienced before. I felt different. And so I began looking at, I went to Catholic churches, I went to an Anglican church, I went to this and that, Protestant, Baptist, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't, until October of 2017, I did not sit in a room with other worshipers and experience a connection to God. But when I did, it changed everything for me. And so I asked them if I could become a Quaker. A couple of weeks later, I asked them, and they said, well, we have a thing called a clearness committee because we want to make sure you're clear about doing this. And so they formed the committee, and they asked me if there were any members of the meeting that I particularly wanted on the committee. So I named some people. And they met with me and talked to me about my spiritual journey and how I came to be. Because I was raised by a physicist, a nuclear physicist, who was in Los Alamos doing nuclear physics theoretical research. At the time, they invented the neutron bomb.
Oh, boy.
1974-75. So, and he was a believer in the scientific philosophy of Hans Reichenbach, so he thought that anything that can't be measured shouldn't be talked about. And things that happened before the Big Bang, can't measure it, happened before anything that can be measured, so don't talk about it. And my mom had been a Catholic as a little girl, but she stopped being a Catholic as a young adult. And she would tell people that she was an agnostic. She would say, I don't know if there is a God, and I don't think you know either. And now I do know there is a God, and I have heard from Jesus and Mary and St. Gertrude.
Is it a situation where the evidence that you have for God is something that you can't really share? It's a personal experience that happened to you?
I have a lot of personal experiences that I can't deny. And I don't think that I can make a compelling case for an atheist who wants to deny evidence. But what I can do is invite anyone to ask Jesus into their heart, or to ask God to demonstrate his existence. And then it's not up to me. It's up to God. And I think God will show those that God wants. I mean, there are a lot of passages in the Bible about people who have eyes and see not, and have ears and hear not. And there's a lot of people in the Bible, God hardens their hearts so that they don't believe.
Like Pharaoh.
Like Pharaoh.
Before he tortured Pharaoh for
like
not letting
the
the Jews go. Right? That was part of the messed up part of the Moses story, right? It says God hardened Pharaoh's heart when Moses went to him and said, "Let my people go." God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So Pharaoh said, "No, I'm not letting your people go."
And why did God do that?
And then God punishes him for that.
God did that so that he could demonstrate his power with the plagues, with the punishments, with the signs and the wonders, showing that Moses truly was capable of miraculous events, and showing the Egyptians that they really should lend these Jewish fellows all of their gold and silver so they could get out of Egypt. And it was God's plan. God chose the people. I mean, this is not the first covenant, right? The Ark of the Covenant isn't the first covenant. The first covenant is with Adam and Eve. There's a tree. Don't eat it. Don't eat its fruit. Don't eat the tree. Don't eat the fruit of the tree. don't even think about eating the fruit of the tree. The snake says, hey, you're not going to die if you eat this fruit. They eat it, and eventually they do die. Not right away, but eventually they experience death because the wages of sin is death. So that was the first covenant. Mankind kind of failed. God was like, I really like these guys, and I want to hang out with them, and I want friends. I don't want like angels that are robots and do everything I say. I want friends who will be like me with free will and the capacity of creation. And so he tries again with another covenant. He takes them out of the Garden of Eden and tells them to be fruitful and multiply, and they do this. And there's Cain and Abel, and there's a problem. Cain doesn't listen. God says that he wants an animal sacrifice. Abel provides one. Cain has fruits and vegetables and wants to provide that. And God's like, that's not what I asked for. Cain then kills his brother. And there's more, chicanery, and it goes on and on.
Murder.
There's a very, very corrupt civilization that's, raping a lot of children and doing horrifying things. And so there's a flood. And then there's a covenant with a rainbow. A rainbow in the sky. God put the rainbow in the sky.
Flood that killed a lot of innocent babies.
Flood that killed the whole world.
Yeah.
And it's an historical event. Geologists will not like to admit this, but it is something that happened, that there is a time at the end of the Younger Dryas, about 11,800 years ago, give or take, when the Laurentide, Cordilleran, and European ice sheets all melted at the same time in a span of weeks, 40 days and 40 nights, and dropped all of their water in the ocean, which rose more than 400 feet. There are pyramids at the bottom of the ocean in the Mediterranean, near Cuba, and the Caribbean, and the Yanakuni site in south of Okinawa. There are a lot of places all over the world where we know that there were civilizations on the coast that got flooded.
I think if you're interested, we can have you back maybe for a separate discussion.
That's fine. Yes. Well, we were not talking about
theism and stuff. Yeah, no, I want to have the conversation, but I also don't want to derail.
Where were we?
We're heading towards, hopefully, how in the hell you ended up living in under a waterfall.
Okay, so in 2006, I had reached the conclusion that there were no free countries to find.
Okay.
And that there was no solution to build a free port like Hong Kong had been.
Yeah.
On the Gulf of Aden in Somalia or anywhere else in the world.
So that's why you went around, you were looking.
So then, yes, I have traveled in the Far East and in the Near East. I've been in Asia, Europe, Africa,
What was
North
the
America.
closest you came?
Texas.
Really?
Yes. When I was in Texas in the late 1990s, after all of these horrible events, I participated in the Republic of Texas independence movement. I was interim Secretary of Defense for one Republic of Texas provisional government, and I was a brigadier general in another provisional government.
Is this recent or a while ago?
98, 99, that time frame.
Because there's some guys still attempting things like that.
Well, sure. I mean, Texas is its own country, right? Even Janis Joplin admitted as much back in the day. Texas became independent in 1836 from Mexico. There was some chicanery, and they had an election in 1845 to become an annexed part of the United States. And they voted again in 1861. More people and a higher percentage voted for independence. And that hasn't ever ended. Texas being separate from the United States as of the 4th of March, 1861, when they counted the votes, is still a true statement. The fact that there was a war and there's a military occupation to this day, two of the biggest military bases in the world are Fort Hood and Fort Bliss, both in Texas.
It's almost like they don't care about the consent of the governed.
No. shocking that you should say this. Listen, I didn't choose the Republic of Texas because I wanted to be a Texan or anything like that. I moved to Texas in '85. I left in 2005. I chose the Republic of Texas because they were the only people talking about individual sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
They were only people I knew until I met the Sons of Confederate Veterans, who also began talking about individual sovereignty, who had any willingness to admit that the individual was higher than the state, that the individual preceded and was therefore more important than the state, and that the state necessarily should be subservient to the individual.
Okay.
Nobody else was talking about that. I talked to people in Europe about this. I went to Den Haag and talked to the Unrecognized Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO, that was proud of the fact that Kosovo had been recognized by the United Nations through some of their efforts. I talked to them in 2001. I met them in their offices, and I was like, so do you think the individual is more important than the state? No. The state is much more important. The state is the collective and the group will and blah, blah, blah. The hive mind.
Okay, so where was the waterfall and how did you end up there?
So I began looking for a free country, and I also began listening to God, and I was led to Oklahoma in 2020, and I was led to Arkansas in 2021. And I was in Fayetteville, Arkansas, listening to Procter & Gamble air Foster Gamble talk on his Thrive network, the Freedom Portal, talking to Stefan Molyneux, a man I had met in 2011 at Porcupine Freedom Festival.
Yeah.
And the only other guest at Bob Walker and Paula Fryer's house besides me was Mary Blazes. And she called me up a week later and said, I got this land. I can't afford it. I can't keep up the payments of the contract for deed. I want help. That was the basics of the story. And so I went and looked at the land. And it's about 9 miles south of Eureka Springs in Arkansas. And it was awesome. There were mountain lion prints. There were deer prints across the road. And then there were in the snow. And then there were it was the 20th of February of 2021 when I first visited this land. And so I knew I had to see more. And so I walked away, and she just stood there on that road, and I walked all around looking for more evidence that this was a great place. And I found it. They have springs and caves. There are flat places. There's probably a couple $1 million worth of cedar oil that can be harvested. There's all these hardwood trees that can be, turned into timber. And there's a place where I would say tens of thousands of gallons a minute comes out of a lake, which gathers a whole bunch of these waterfall and streams of drainage water. And then it goes through one outflow so fast that you could have a micro hydro unit there and make hydroelectric power.
Was there a cabin already, or did you build your own? Or?
No. This was on unimproved land. The guys who owned it only used it for hunting, only in the hunting season for deer. They occasionally hunted turkey, but mostly deer. And so I was living in a tent under a bluff next to a waterfall from April until about October.
Wow.
Yeah, it was cool. A lot of fun. I actually pitched the tent there on the 4th of March. And then I stayed in a camper trailer for a while because it was really cold.
Why'd you leave?
The landowners said that they didn't like Mary Blazes at all, and they gave me a long list of reasons they didn't like her. And they asked me to put things back the way they were. And so I spent quite a few weeks in October putting things back the way they were, and they were happy with that. And they have more recently been talking to me again. And I visited the land again a few weeks ago, and they have suggested the amount that they would take as an offer. So we are negotiating, and I'm putting together the funding again. We had made a cash offer last autumn for the timber, basically, and they didn't like that because they didn't think we would be able to harvest the timber.
How do you know Chuck, the Float CXO, and why are you here at Float Fest?
So I met Chuck in person the week before we got here, because he invited me to Florida to Enchanted Bluffs, his property there, with some other people. He's a co-owner, and he's having issues with trust because his now ex-wife.
We don't need to go into personal
There were
stuff.
trust issues.
Yeah.
And so one of the solutions that was proposed was that my friend Gator Greenwill, who buys tourist properties, would buy the place. And so I put together a detailed description of the property for Gator and sent that off to him with an asking price.
Okay.
And
It's getting a little crazy here.
well, there's a lot of wind in the world.
Yeah. It's all right here at the moment. Okay. Well.
And so I know Chuck through my friend J.D. Bertrand, who co-founded Bequeath, I guess with me, or he did the founding of it and did all of the math, and then I helped him write the business plan starting in November of last year. And one of the people he wanted to describe it to was Chuck. And we got everything ready near the end of March of this year. And Chuck was a little busy.
Yeah.
As you know. And so on the 12th of April, I had a Jitsi type meeting with Chuck and JD, and we talked about it, and Chuck was very interested and might become an investor if he could liquidate the property and have some capital to work with. And we were at the time asking $10,000 minimum for that deal. Bequeath. And we knew each other, the three of us, from an online organization that was founded by Sonora Jack in 2018. You can read about it in the Libertarian Enterprise. The article is called Caledonia Beckons. See, Jack and I had been friends going back to about 2010 on Facebook and Twitter, but we had never met until Jack Fest in 2018. And Jack was interested in my mutual aid response team project in Kansas City and Knoxville, Tennessee, and some other places. And so Jack said to me at Jack Fest in 2018, I've been thinking about starting a kind of tribe. And I have a bunch of people who would join the tribe and be mutually assisting if there were problems. And there are these apps like Signal and Telegram we can use for communications. And I don't know whether we should do this. And I said, well, Jack, what are you asking? He said, I'm asking you whether we should do this. And I said, you're asking me whether I think a group of people should get together and cooperate to be free? Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I have very much enjoyed hearing your story.
Thank you.
It's a wild one.
Oh, it gets wilder from here. On the 18th of April of this year,
Okay.
I was driving to Austin, Texas to meet an old friend of mine. And God spoke to me and said, I am John Galt. You have 6 months. And I thought to myself, I should say that to my friend William Baxter, the Chief Technology Officer for Vertalo. They work in secondary liquidity. And I thought to myself, I will say, I am John Galt, you have 8 months. And God was like, no, you have 6 months. And I was like, I have 6 months. 6 months to build a free society because God will stop the motor of the world.
6 months from when?
The 18th of April.
Of April. Interesting. Okay.
Which is famous in a poem by Henry Longfellow, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
You're like a doomsayer right now.
One could call me that, or a prophet of God, or
Yeah.
a messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just the messenger.
I'm not shooting anybody. That would be a NAP violation.
I would think. Putting the non-aggression principle on the blockchain was something that I worked out with Arto Bendekin and Frank Brown and the other members of the Cypherpunks guild of the NEAR protocol. And they actually have a $5,000 grant in NEAR token, which they're willing to provide for us to do that, to put the zero aggression principle on the blockchain. So you as an individual would pay like 1/10 of an ounce of silver, and there would be on the blockchain evidence that you had agreed that you would not aggress against others, nor delegate the aggression to other parties.
Yep.
And then you could also post a surety that, here's $10,000. If I ever aggress against anyone and it's adjudicated in a private court, then they get the $10,000.
Wow.
And that kind of thing. And I worked it all out with, and all we need is a coder for NEAR protocol. So the coder gets most of the 5,000 plus 40% of the 10th ounce of silver from each person who puts it on the blockchain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Patrick.
I've enjoyed. Is there some overarching lesson to all of this that you'd like to kind of tell the world?
Oh, absolutely. Obey God. It's really important. When God tells you to do something, do it right away. Don't wait. And if you want to inherit eternal life, read the Bible and follow the rules, because you are able to participate in the resurrection. And the whole business of death from the Garden of Eden, that's all gone. But you really do have to repent your sins, be baptized in water and with the Holy Spirit, and then you're good with God. And that's important. I mean, people trivialize that, and they say, well, that didn't happen, and all of that's myth, and blah, blah, blah. But I find it very real because of my experiences. And that is true freedom from death. I mean, I was an extropian in the 70s and 80s. I wanted to live forever. I wanted my head to be frozen by Alcor. I actually wanted my whole body to be frozen because there are parts of my body that I'm very fond of. And I didn't want to be without.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this chat as well. We have more coming for you. All right. Peace, love, anarchy.